I fled him. Down the nights and down the days, I fled him. Down the arches of the years, I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind and in the midst of tears. I hid from him and under running laughter. Up vistas hopes I spread, and shot precipitated adown titanic glooms of chasm fears from those strong feet that followed after. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, they beat, and a voice beat, more instant than the feet. All things betray thee, who betrayest me. This is a poem known as The Hound of Heaven, penned in the 19th century by Francis Thompson, describing himself as the one who is fleeing from the Lord as a rabbit flees from a hound. Strong feet, unhurrying chase, unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, those feet beat, and the voice beat as well. The hound of heaven, God himself, chases after you, and he will never stop coming after you, because he knows, and his voice whispers to you from behind with utter clarity, all things that betrayest me will betrayest thee. All things that would betray God will ultimately betray you as well. So God continues to pursue, he continues to chase, and he never stops chasing. We're starting a series today, right now, called The Running Man, about a powerful prophet named Jonah, famous in word and deed, and he was given from a call, and he ran from it. He ran away. And now, when you bring up the name Jonah, if you're like me, you just think, when I was a kid, I kind of knew about Jonah and something about a whale. But I got them mixed up with Pinocchio, because Pinocchio and Geppetto, they got in a whale too. And turns out it wasn't a whale at all. It was actually a big fish. But you get all this stuff mixed up, and you're like, really? Really, did he really get swallowed by a fish? And bear with the story. If God can create the universe and fling galaxies, he can direct a fish. Jonah is a case study, though, of a man who's run from God, and he's on his way. He's running away. It's not about a wooden puppet. In fact, it's a magnificent story of grace. It's an ancient masterpiece. The first two chapters of Jonah are in perfect order that line up with the way the next two chapters run. It's a case study of how you, me, and any of us can run from the purpose that God has given us. I'm going to read the story in a moment, but let me tell you a little bit more about Jonah. Jonah was a famous prophet in the 9th century BC under King Jeroboam II. It was a prosperous time. They had a really good economy, and Jonah was really supportive of Jeroboam II. They did really well, except there was this little problem. The Assyrians. The Assyrians were the major empire in that day and age. And they dominated, and they tortured, and they were cruel. And everybody feared the Assyrians. In fact, they feared them so much that the Syrians didn't even have to conquer a country. They could just demand tribute from them, and that's exactly what they did with Israel. And so all the people of Israel resented the Assyrians. Why? Because they kept demanding all this money from Israel. They'd have a good economy, but they'd have to give it over to Assyria. But they were afraid, because the Assyrians, when they conquered, they would torture, they would burn, they would do all sorts of things that I can't share on camera, really, because it would so disgust you that you'd be distracted the rest of the time. Literally, this stuff that I read about is absolutely awful of what they did. And Jonah's going to get mixed up with the Assyrians, these legendary ancient terrorists. All right? So listen in while I go ahead and read. And a little extra geography. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. Jonah chapter 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. So God says, go, and Jonah says, no. In fact, Jonah, instead of getting on his mule or his horse and head towards Assyria, he goes straight to the port, and he sets his course to go as far away from Nineveh as possible. Tarshish would be right where you would think modern day Spain is. In that day, it was like literally the end of the earth. So he was going to go as far away from Nineveh as possible. He was not going to follow what the Lord wanted at all. Nineveh was over here. Tarshish was over here. God calls him to go to Nineveh, and we have to be compassionate with Jonah here. This is really difficult, because he probably figured he would die there. So he didn't want to do that. But he also had a problem because, and we're going to see this a little bit later in the book, he hated the Assyrians. See, there's two bad things that could happen if he goes and preaches in Nineveh. First is this, he could die. The second thing is that they could listen. They could listen and respond and experience God's blessing. And that is the last thing Jonah wanted. And this is a pretty important thing, because it's very clear that Jonah doesn't really understand who God is. The whole picture of the Old Testament is that God wanted to use Israel to be a blessing to the nations. That Israel would be blessed so that they might be a blessing to the nations. That they would be a light to the nations. But Jonah wanted to have none of it. We just wrapped up a series on our purpose. Thinking about what it means to have a life on purpose. And the thing we're trying to dial ourselves into is recognizing that, okay, no matter what's going on out there, we know that God has placed us here for a reason. That we have a mission from God. That we are called with a specific purpose. And the most important thing, the most central thing we could do is to line ourselves up with His purpose, with His purpose for us. Sometimes that purpose includes Nineveh. Sometimes God's going to call you to your version of Nineveh. that very thing you don't want to do, or that very challenge you don't want to take on. Or maybe address that thing in your life that you've been avoiding for a long time. Every single one of us may have a Nineveh or a series of Ninevehs in our lives. And what we have an opportunity to do is to look at a case study of what it looks like for us to run from God and what it means to hear how God runs further and faster after us. How we can hear those feet following after. So let's start here. What we see in these first 5 verses is a perfect progression of what it means to run away from God. Like I said, this year's theme verse is, as the Father sent me, so I send you. We're supposed to be on purpose. What's it like when we're off purpose? Well, let's see what happens with Jonah. First, what happens is, typically speaking, we make a determination that if we can't see a good reason, well, there must not be one. Jonah in his mind is like, why would you ever want to show any kind of grace to the Assyrians? They're terrible people. Jonah's right. They were terrible people. Jonah didn't see a good reason. And because he didn't see a good reason, he made his way. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. You might even be asking, God, is there a reason around this pandemic? Is there a reason for the division? Or is there... And in the face of these, you might want to walk as well. There's a couple things going on here. First, there's Jonah's will. Jonah has his idea of what God ought to be doing in this world, and this isn't part of it. And so he's moving on. He's moving on because he cannot imagine a universe in which the Assyrians would deserve God's grace or would be able to receive God's grace. And he clearly doesn't understand who God is. There's a book I've been reading recently called The Coddling of the American Mind. The Coddling of the American Mind. The two authors have been working in academia, and they noticed something happening right around 2012, 13, and 14. Right around the time Gen Z got to college. One of the things that started happening is that students started demanding trigger warnings for different ideas that they didn't necessarily agree with. What had happened was students started recognizing that, hey, certain kind of content could possibly draw up trauma in their lives. And what had happened over the last 15, 20 years is the definition of trauma had gone from, post-traumatic stress, like soldiers when they experience violence, being reminded of it, to a much broader definition. And not just that, they start recognizing, well, if I experience not just bad feelings, but even ideas that they didn't agree with. And so they demanded professors start causing trigger warnings if there's ever going to be something that they might disagree with. And then they started from the right and the left. If there was a speaker that they didn't agree with, they would demand that the university cancel those speaking engagements and those invitations. Why? Because they didn't want to have any of that content or those ideas brought on. And the idea that the authors are mentioning, there's 3 basic things that have kind of infiltrated into the worldview of Americans in general, and particularly Gen Z. The first one is this, that which doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That struggle actually is something that actually should be avoided. And that kids ought not to have to struggle with different kinds of ideas. The second one is this, that you should always trust your feelings. If your feelings make you feel bad, then it must be bad. One of the ways I needed to deal with my struggle was with anxiety. I remember talking to my counselor. She said, anxiety goes away if you just stay true to it and work your way through it. And I didn't realize that. Once I learned that, I knew that the anxiety would go away if I stood strong and found the support I needed to continue to go through it. The third one, and this is what's coming up with Jonah here, is that there are good people in the world and then there are evil people in the world. And when you can make a world where there are good people and evil people, then you could say people like the Assyrians, they don't get to be blessed. They don't get to be blessed. I'm going to have the God of Israel, and the God of Israel is going to bless Israel, and he's going to only bless Israel, and that's the way I want it. And you do that, and then television networks can begin demonizing other groups, right? You can end up with certain tribal groups, and the best way, and they teach this in math and MBA programs, the best way to produce a bond of unity on your team is to come up with a common enemy. And in Israel, the common enemy were the Ninevites. Those people were different. All of those people would all kill Israelites as soon as they could. And they had these ideas of these horrible people who would do all these horrible things. And yes, their leaders had done some horrible things. And in Jonah's mind, there were evil people. They didn't get included in the blessing. Jonah didn't know himself very well. And he didn't know his God very well. The other thing that was going on was shame. Jonah knew if he stayed in Israel, people would find out that he had disobeyed God. So he wanted to, in his mind, it says he wanted to leave the presence of the Lord. In Jonah's mind, he thought that the Lord was only in Israel. He'd gotten caught up with all the other worldviews of the other nations where they thought, well, Israel had its God and Assyria had its God. And if he could just leave Israel, he'd be able to get away from the Lord. Well, that wasn't going to work. Because no matter how far you run, the feet still follow. So the second thing that happens is once you make the decision that if you don't see a good reason, there must not be one, well, then your will can do whatever you want. Then you run, you wander, you float, you chase, whatever. Once you've said, well, if God doesn't give me a good reason, there must not be one, then you've already set in your mind that you're going to do whatever you want to do. And this can happen all kinds of ways. Some people wander from the Lord. Some people are chase after something else. Some people just simply get bored. And they get bored and they go looking into something else. You might have heard the story of the Bronx bus driver, William Samillo. He was famous back in 1947. He got in his bus and he was working his daily route, and he just got tired. He just got tired of the New York traffic. So he just pulled off and just started driving. He drove into New Jersey. He got himself a bite to eat. He kept driving. He stopped in front of the White House and hung out there for a little while. And then he kept driving. 3 days later, he's in Hollywood, Florida. And he telegraphs his boss, and he was bored and not very intelligent either. Anyway, he telegraphs his boss saying he could use $50 because he'd run out of cash. Well, shortly thereafter, the police show up and they're like, dude, you stole the bus, man. And, they arrest him. And the problem was, none of them knew how to drive the bus. And so part of what they had to do is they had to make him drive the bus back to New York City. Anyway, by the time he gets back, he's a hero around the nation. People are sending him fan mail. They're thanking him. They're inspired by his act of freedom and conquest. And he takes his job and goes back, and he's a bus driver for another 30 years. And when they asked him why he did it, he said, well, he just got bored. I think people like me, pastors, God's going to hold us accountable for making the faith boring. Because I don't know where we've gotten this, and I've probably said this message as well, that like, hey, Jesus could tweak your life and just make it a little bit better. If you add Jesus into your life, it'll make it just a little bit better. Wouldn't you like your life to be a little bit better? But that's not the message that Jesus gave. Jesus said, look, hell is ravaging this world. Hell is ravaging this world. And I have built my church And my church will prevail over hell and everything that destroys it. And so when Jesus looks at Westchester and Jesus looks at, you know, Chester County and Delaware County, northern Delaware, he recognizes and he knows it is a mess out there. There's all sorts of messes, and Project 938, you got to fix them. He didn't say, I have built my nonprofit organizations. He didn't say, I built a political party. He didn't say, I built a bunch of good people who are going to do it right. No. He said, I am going to build my church. My church is the way I'm going to prevail over the darkness and hell in this world. It's not nonprofits, it's not government, it's not political parties, it's not homeowners associations, it's not police officers, it's not the military. God's way of overcoming hell in this world is you and me joined together in the church. That's why one of our central practices is pray for one. Because every single day we want to be praying that we would be involved in God's purposes for this world. He changes this world through his church one life at a time, and he's called us to be a part of it. If you are bored, you don't understand Christianity. If you are bored, you don't even know who Jesus is. He has called you into a mission, and if you are bored, you have lost an understanding of what the faith is. God has called you to where you are. You have a purpose. And we attach ourselves that purpose through prayer. And how we're doing as a church is every single day we want to pray for one person. We want to pray that God would use us in one person's life. That we would find ourselves on that mission, whether at our workplace, at school, in our neighborhood, in our family, however it is, we would attach ourselves with his purpose and live on that mission. Sometimes we wander off because we get bored. Sometimes we float away once we lose our tether. For some folks, faith was just what their family had for them. It was you grew up in the faith, and as long as you're close to your family, you're close to your faith. But once the cord broke between you and your family and you became adult, you just kind of, you began drifting off. You might have heard the story of that blimp, a blimp that was launched in Western Maryland, in Aberdeen, Maryland, that was supposed to be 10,000 feet above, literally hooked to the ground. And it was designed to be a missile protection project for us. Well, the tether broke and the blimp just started floating. This happened in 2015. These unbelievable cords holding this blimp in the air just started floating all the way across eastern Pennsylvania. It was an unmanned military surveillance blimp, and it was just off. And they didn't know what to do with it. Literally, they scrambled F-16s that were flying around trying to bring this thing down to the ground. Here's the thing. It caused unbelievable damage. Why? Because that tether dragged itself through all kinds of electric cables. Literally, the schools were like, children, get inside. Because this blimp was wandering off. Has that happened for you? Was your faith tethered to a person or a particular church? Or maybe to a particular moment because something really special happened? If your faith is tethered to anything else but Jesus, it's going to float and wander off. One of the things that for some people right now, not having a place to come every single Sunday, the event was their tether. Not having the event, well, they're prone to wander, and that's how the song goes. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Take my heart, Lord, help seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. One of the practices we're trying to continue is to surrender and worship. Not at an event, but every single day we surrender ourselves to God. God, I'd fight you. But God, I want to surrender to your purposes for who you are. We might wander off because we're bored. We might get untethered from what held us to the faith. For some of us, just get distracted. Leo Tolstoy tells a story, a short story called Much Land. And it's a Russian peasant named Pahom. And he's given this opportunity by a wealthy landowner. For 1,000 rubles, he will let Pahom have as much land as he wants. Now, Pahom had a nice family, and he was able to provide for his family through his work. But this gave him the opportunity to get so much land. This was the catch. You can have as much land as you want, as far out as you can go. Just go and dig a little hole, and wherever you dig a hole, you can have that land. The catch is you have one day, and as far as you can extend yourself to dig these holes, you can have the land. But the catch is you have to get back before the sun goes down, or you get none of it. Well, sure enough, Pahom starts digging holes, and he starts wandering off digging holes, and he's trying to go as fast as he can. He goes to the next place, digs a hole, goes to the next place, digs a hole. He's going, he wants to kind of stop and slow it down, but he's afraid that he might fall asleep and miss out on his opportunity. So he keeps going, he's getting hot, and he keeps going, and he keeps going, and he's actually gotten quite far, but he just wants to get to that next field. He gets to the next field, and all of a sudden he notices that the sun is getting low in the sky. So he drops his shovel, and he just starts running, and he just starts running. And the sun is getting darker, and he's running as hard as he can. And he can see where everybody's waiting for him. And it's getting darker, and it's getting darker. And he gives everything he has till finally he dives across the line at the last moment. And everyone's wildly cheering for him because clearly he went so far and made it back. But when his servants come to pick him up, they found that he had died. The final line of the story reads, his servant picked up the spade and dug a grave long enough for Pahom to lie in and buried him in it. 6 feet from his head to his heels was all the land he needed. Maybe we don't run for land, but maybe we're running for likes, or for thrills or memories or promotions or points on his fitness app. It's tempting just to kind of keep running. We're not drifting, but like that dog who leaves the safety of the yard to run after that squirrel, we chase after something. Is there something you're chasing after? Is there something that has lured you away from the safety and protection and care of God? Remember what the voice says? All things that betrayest me will betrayest thee. Remember, the feet, they follow. So first, we said, well, if there's no good reason, there must not be a good reason. Secondly, once we made that decision, we run, we chase, we go, we wander. Thirdly, we pay. When Jonah decided to run away, he went down to Joppa and he got on that boat and he paid the fare to get to Tarshish. And one of the temptations that will always be true for us is to think that, like, well, sin is innocent. Sin doesn't cost us, or running away doesn't cost us. And we might say, well, the Christian life is so costly. Well, I'm sorry, all of life is costly. And no matter where you're going to go, you will pay. We always pay. Everything is costly. And you say, if I can do this, maybe I can get a spouse. We make these deals. If I do this, I can get a little bit more. If I skim here, then I'll be able to. If I can just dig a few more holes, right? But don't ever believe that sin doesn't come at a price. Jonah paid the fare and he got the boat and he brought the storm with him. And we'll see next week that the storm just didn't cost him, but it started costing everybody as the sailors start throwing everything off that boat. Because here comes the storm, here comes the feet, here comes the voice, because the feet, they follow. Sin brings a storm, sin brings a cost, but God continues to follow. The fourth thing is this. After we pay, well, eventually we fall asleep to it. After a while, when we're on the run, we can sleep well at night. Jonah slept deeply. Everybody on that ship was absolutely terrified of the consequences of his decisions. He slept just fine. Eventually, if you drift far enough, you can sleep fine. Your conscience will rest well, because your conscience will have been hardened and you have lost any sensitivity to what God really wants for you. He slept deeply while the storm raged outside. A lot of us, we can fall asleep to our junk. I've seen it in my own life. It looks like denial, self-deception, self-justification. A guy named Jonah Lair wrote a book called How We Decide. And he studied things like, how does a quarterback decide within 1 second who to throw the ball to? How does a goalie know how to use its instincts? How do we decide which flavor of ice cream we like best? Well, one of the things that brain science has discovered is that the brain has two different tracks. It has the fast track and the slow track. The fast track is that thing that enables a quarterback to just know by feel we got to throw it here, or the goalie know by feel that they need to move here. There's no rational thinking. Well, like I'm looking at 5 receivers, and this one's mostly open. This one's kind of open. This one, there's no time for rational. The fast track has to make the decision. Where fast track is always activated in decisions, and our fast track is almost always connected to our emotions. In fact, they find that people who do not have emotions have a very difficult time making decisions. Why? Because our emotions give us the ability to move over the obstacles to make a decision. Why do I say that? Is that most of the time our slow track, which is our rationale, our reasoning, our logic, we use our logic to justify the decisions we've already made. Let me say that again. We make our decisions with our fast track, and most of the time we use our logic to justify the decisions we've already made. Unless we can use our slow track, our logic, to shape that which we want. People who attend church regularly need to be especially careful of this, because we will sometimes think that because we attend regularly, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, it justifies the other emotional decisions we make. Or we can rewrite the truth of God to justify our instinctive decisions around this. The book of Romans talks about how this falls apart for us. It says, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, God gave them over to a depraved mind. If you lose your affection for God, God will let you. If you lose your affection for the things of God, He will let you. Oh, it'll bring a storm eventually, but God will let you run away from Him. The feet will always follow. But God will let you drag the cords and destroy the life around you. He will let you. If you want to run from Him, He will let you. Yes, His feet will follow. The voice will follow. But it's on you to turn around and be caught. Sometimes people say, I want to do my own thing for a while, and then I will come back to God's way. But what they don't realize is once they start doing their own thing for a while, they're going to develop a whole new set of affections. And once you develop those sensitive affections, will you even want to come back? See, when you have a moment of clarity and we use our slow track to build the right kinds of affections. That's why one of the practices we're talking about is we want to continue to make room for others. We don't just consume every moment. We don't just work every moment. We don't pursue every moment. We don't try to squeeze everything into our lives. Why? Because we don't need more in our lives to be satisfied. God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. So we allow space. We don't need more likes to be okay. We don't need another memory. We don't need to look cool. We don't need that. We don't need, no. We are fundamentally not needy people. because God has given us everything that we need. A few centuries after Jonah, Jesus came and he spoke of the sign of Jonah and that he would fulfill the sign of Jonah. But there's this one day in particular where he had been teaching all day, he'd been teaching from a boat and been teaching the people on the shore. And he got tired and he told his disciples, hey, let's go to the other side of the lake. And he lays down on the end of the boat, and just like Jonah, he fell asleep. And while he was sleeping, this huge storm came and was ravaging the boat. And the disciples came to him and said, Jesus, don't you care about that we're going to drown? We never heard what Jesus said to them. I think he was quiet. Jesus stood up. He rebuked the storm, and the storm stopped. And the disciples were like, what? They were in the presence of God himself. And God has the power over the storm, and God can stop the storm. God has all the power over 2020. God has the power over storms. God has the power over the virus. God has the power. He is not freaked out by this. We are here for a purpose. We are here for a reason. We have been sent. I invite you into this purpose. I invite you into this calling. The feet they follow. Unperturbed pace. The feet they beat. The voice it beats. Jesus won't let you get away. As a church, we want to lean into that, particularly through this series. We're going to be inviting you into an opportunity to bless another part of the world. We're going to get involved in what is known as a community transformation project, investing particularly in the next generation to see a community transformed by investing in the infrastructure and the next generation of children. We're very excited about that because we believe that this actual project we're going to be getting involved is going to give each of us a way to get personally involved and relationally involved and even showing up involved to where that is. Now, I'm not going to give any more details away, but come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Let's pray. God, we thank you that Jesus, when you were called and sent for us, you didn't run the other way. You ran after us. And God, even when we've run from you, the feet never stop. And you never stop chasing after us. And God, yes, there are things that we've given ourselves to that would betray you and us. God, loosen our grip on those things that we might be surrendered to you, fully satisfied in you, strengthened in you, and serving the purpose for which you've called us here. God, I pray for each person here that you give them a growing sense of your calling and purpose in life. May we as a church step into that very same thing. Trusting you for these things, we look to you in Jesus' name. Amen.